Okay, so now that we have all the pieces in place, let's go ahead and start making this boss battle happen. So we'll go to our scripts folder and we're going to create a new script that we will call we'll just call it the boss script, and we'll open this up here, and obviously we're going to attach this to our boss battle over here. So let's just make sure it's opening here fine. I'm going to get rid of that little error message, and we'll go back here and we'll go to our boss battle. And so I'm going to attach the script here so we know what we're using as our kind of base point for all this. So on our add component, we're just going to add the boss script like that. So let's just go through step by step and see what is going on with our boss battle. So obviously the first thing that will happen is our player will come down here and walk into this box that we're using to activate the battle. So if we want to know if the battle is activated or not, we'll need a Boolean value that will control whether the battle is currently happening or not in the game. So what we'll do is just add a public bool that we'll call boss active. So we know the boss is activated in the world. And how do we check if the player is entered? Well, we use our same thing that we've used many times before, which is our void on trigger enter 2D collider 2D other, like that. And then we'll check that it is the player that has entered the area. If other.tag equals player, then all we want to do basically is say, okay, our boss active should be equal to true. So we know that we should start being able to do some stuff as soon as that happens. So if we're checking to see if the boss active is true, then we know that we need to be checking if that's true. So everything else we're going to run is going to be within our update loop. And so we need to know if our script is doing anything, or should be doing anything at the moment, because, for example, if our player dies, we will want to set our boss active to be false again, because we don't want our boss to be able to summon all those little dropping down saws if we can't, or if he's not supposed to be active in the world. So we'll say here, if boss active, and put a close bracket, and we'll do a little curly bracket here like this, so that we're actually doing something in the world. So if the boss is active, then we're going to be doing some stuff here. So we're going to be doing a lot of timing based stuff within our boss battle here. For example, what's going to happen first is our boss is going to drop down from the right here. So he's going to drop down, and then as soon as he drops down, we're going to start dropping saws. So there'll be a certain amount of time in between each saw dropping down that we need to keep track of. And then we're going to wait a little bit of time for these platforms to appear. And then as soon as they appear, then we're able to jump on top of the boss enemy and do some damage to him. So we're going to need some timers to keep track of those things dropping down. So we're going to create a public float that we'll call time between drops, like that. And then we'll obviously need to keep track of we need to keep track of that value as we go on. So we'll create a private float that we'll call drop count. And so what we're going to do is we'll use our drop count here to count down. So we'll set that to be whatever our time between drops is. Say that's 2 seconds between each drop. We'll set our drop count is equal to that. Then we'll count down our drop count, and when that gets to 0, we'll make a new saw appear, and then we'll count down the time until the next one appears. So if we're going to want to set that to be our time between drops, we'll want it to be that at the very start. So in our start function here, we're just going to add drop count is equal to time between drops, like that. We're also going to want to wait a certain amount of time before our platforms appear. So we'll add a new bool here, or sorry, a new float here that will say a public float. We'll call it wait for platforms, and then we'll obviously need a private counter to keep track of that. So we'll say a private float. We'll call it platform count. So that'll keep track of how long it takes for each platform to go down. And the same way as we did with the drop count here, we want that to be set to be full straight away. So we'll say our platform count is equal to wait for platforms. Okay, so the simplest thing that we can do right now is handle how our drop saws are going to drop down into the world. So if we're going to make them drop down, we're going to make them drop from the top of the screen up here. So we're going to need something that knows what kind of area can it drop the things between. So we're kind of going to need a point on the left here. We're going to need a point on the right here that we can move between those 2 points. And then we're also going to need another kind of point in space that we can move around and say, okay, this point should be where the drop saws are appearing from. So if we're going to need to tree them. So let's create them here in our boss battle. So we're going to right click on our boss battle to create an empty child, and we'll call this one left point. We'll create another one that we're going to call right point, and then we'll create a third one that we're going to call drop saw spawn. So that's the point we're going to use to spawn the drop saws. Okay, so our left point, we should put that at the point that is as far over to the left as they can appear. So we're going to put that in the middle of our enemy. And we're actually going to double up the uses of this. So like we discussed about our bad guy, we said he's going to drop in from the top down to here, and then we have to jump on top of him, and then he's going to drop in from the left down to here. So we can make use of our left and right points as the spawn points for our enemy. So if we put this left point kind of in the middle of him here, roughly speaking, then we can drag it up so it's above the camera, so that it's dropping in. And we can do the same with our right point. So let's just move our boss back over to the right hand side here, and then our right point, let's just make our right platforms active so that we make sure we're not getting in the middle of them. No, that's fine. So our right point then we're going to drag so it's roughly in the middle of the enemy, and then drag it up off the screen as well. So now what will happen is if we tell him to spawn, he'll spawn either here or on our left point over here. And then finally we've got our drop saw, and the only thing that matters for this is how high it is. So we want this to actually be on the screen. So we want to make sure that we're below the top white line of the camera here. So we'll put it like roughly around here, high enough that the player won't be able to just jump over those drop saws when they start popping into the game. So now we need to make a reference to these in our script. So let's go back in here, and we're going to create a reference to the 3Ds. We'll say a public transform that should be a capital T. Public transform left point, then public transform right point, and then finally public transform drop saw spawn. Hold on, I can't spell things here. Spawn point. There we go. Okay, so we've got those 3 points now that we can make use of. And if our boss is active, we know that our drop count should just be happening in their game. So we're going to start adding that stuff into our boss active thing here. So basically what should happen is if our drop count is greater than 0, then what we should be doing is counting down to 0. So our drop count should be minus equal time dot delta time. So as we've discussed before, what that'll do is just make a countdown from whatever value we initially give it. So what happens then if our drop count is not greater than 0? So if our drop count is equal to or less than 0, so we can say else there. So if it's any other value, then we want to actually spawn in our new in a new drop saw. So if we're going to spawn in something new, we need to know what it is that we're going to spawn in. So let's go back up here again, and we're going to add public public game object that we will call our drop saw. So now what we can do down here, as we've used before to create our particle effects and stuff like that, we're going to use instantiate, and this is going to go instantiate, and the object we want to instantiate is our drop saw. And the place we want to put it is wherever our drop saw spawn point is. So drop saw spawn point. And the rotation should just be the drop saw spawn point dot rotation. And actually, if I just close that bracket there like that, we should be putting it at drop saw spawn point dot position, of course, because or else we're trying to give a vector tree to a transform, which doesn't make sense. So we need to get the vector tree position here to apply to what we're instantiating. So if we're going to instantiate at the drop saw spawn point, that's all fine and dandy, but we need that spawn point to be moving. There's no point in having it be in the same place the whole time and just dropping one saw, because that's not going to be very challenging for our player. So what we should do just before we instantiate it is move the drop saw spawn point. So let's say drop saw spawn point dot position is equal to a new vector tree. So like I said, we're not going to want to change the Y position, and we're definitely not going to change the Z position at all. The only thing we want to change is our X position, and we want it to appear somewhere between our left point up here and our right point. So what we can do is make it randomly decide a point between the two of those, and the way we do that is by using random.range. And random.range basically, fairly straightforwardly, it just picks a random number between two different numbers. So we can use, if we open a bracket here, we can say, so the first number should be our left point dot transform dot x. So whatever the x value is of our left point, or sorry, not transform dot x, transform, it should be, we don't actually need to say transform. What we need to just say is left point dot position dot x. There we go. And so that'll be the minimum point, and then the maximum point will be our right point dot position dot x. So there we go. We have our random range will be somewhere between the x value of our left point, which will be minus 6.2, and our right point, which is 5.8. So it'll pick a random number between those two numbers, and it'll choose that as the x value of where our drop saw spawn should appear. So if we go back in here, that's what we're deciding to do with the x part of the new vector tree. So let's add what we're going to do with the y value. We want it to say the same as what it was, so we'll just say our drop saw spawn point dot position dot y, because we want to keep it the exact same, and we'll say the exact same thing for our x position, drop saw spawn point dot position dot z, and then close that bracket and hit our semicolon. And now if we save it, we should be able to see this part of the boss in action. So we'll go back into Unity, let that compile down here, and then we'll need to, of course, hook up a few little things that we just made. So in our boss battle script, we've got these empty spaces here now. So let's start connecting them up. So our left point is our left point, our right point goes in there, our drop saw spawn goes into our drop saw spawn point, and then the drop saw item we want to use is in our prefabs in our dangers here. We've got the falling spinning saw here. So let's just click back on boss battle so we can drag it in there like that. And then how long are we going to wait between drops? We'll start with 2 seconds for now. Let's just set a value for our wait for platforms. We'll set this to be about 5 seconds as well. We're not going to use that just yet, but we'll have it there nonetheless. So if we just drag our player back to here just for the moment, we're going to test how well this is all working so far. I'm also going to deactivate the platforms that we see, and I'm going to deactivate the boss for the moment, and we're going to hit play. Okay, so we get a little bit of music playing, and we walk into the spawn zone. Oh, and we've got our drop saw objects appearing like crazy, because if we go back in here, what we didn't do was set our drop count to be equal to our time between drops again. So when we instantiate a new one, we want to make sure that our count goes back up to being full again. So we will say drop count is equal to time between drops, like that. So that makes sure that once we instantiate something new, it goes back up to being 2 seconds, and we wait another 2 seconds for our drop saw to spawn. But you did see there that our drop saws were actually appearing in lots of different places along the spectrum, but appearing within the range of the left point and right point. So we'll play this again and make sure it all works fine. And we should be a bit happier with it this time. So we walked into our zone, and there we go. We wait 2 seconds, and a saw falls down to the ground and disappears behind the player like that. So perfect. That's exactly what we want to do. It's a little bit of a danger, but we're going to make them go a bit faster as we go further into our boss battle. But for the moment, we're happy with how these drop saws are falling down.